For every possible click in Geometry Dash, there's something I'll call a survivability window. This is the range between the earliest possible input and the latest possible input that still lets the player survive. This window, and its relationship to other windows in the level, is what determines how fair a click feels. What determines fairness? A click's fairness relies on multiple factors: the raw size of its window in frames, its relationship to the level's overall difficulty, and most importantly, the player's perception of the window. At first glance, you might think the size of the window is all that matters. A bigger window equals an easier click, and a smaller one equals harder. But it's not that simple. The real difficulty depends on a player's perception of the earliest and latest possible input, which often doesn't match the actual window. That perception varies based on experience, muscle memory, and even how readable the click is within the level's design. Visualizing the window. To make this easier to understand, I created a simple diagram of how a survivability window actually works. Here's what you'll see: an outer bar representing the true frame window of the click, an inner bar representing the perceived window, the one the player feels they're working within, an actual center point, the mathematically perfect middle of the click, and a perceived center point, where the player thinks the right timing is. We usually aim for the middle of the window because the closer we are to the center, the higher our chances of survival are. But the perceived window can be bigger, smaller, or even shifted relative to the actual one. Perceived versus actual. The actual window never changes, at least not for the purpose of this section of the video. It's locked to the game's frame system, but the perceived window does change. It shifts depending on how well the player understands the click, how much practice they've had, and how intuitive the design feels. As a creator, you generally want the perceived window to be smaller than the actual window. That way, players believe they're working with a tighter margin of error than they really are. It creates a sense of precision while still giving them hidden forgiveness. This is what makes gameplay feel fair without being trivial. Fortunately, the game already helps out there. Most hitboxes in Geometry Dash are more forgiving than they look. A spike's hitbox, for example, is smaller than its visible sprite. And on blocks, the opposite happens. The player's hitbox appears to clip into the surface. These hidden details widen the actual survivability window behind the scenes. Orientation and shifts. Now let's move to the more complicated part, orientation. How well the player understands the click influences the orientation of the perceived window. With this click here, it appears to be just the triple spike you worry about, but with a slightly different alignment, you are killed by the top spike. Once you learn this click, the perceived window aligns with the actual window. Of course, this example is more applicable to sight reading, which is not the subject of the video. Let's look at a wave click inside a portal, like this. It is almost instinctual to click as soon as your wave icon touches the portal, but that's not what the actual frame window would tell us. The window starts as soon as you touch the portal, all the way up to when you'd run into the slopes. The optimal time for an input would be between those 2 points. So why is it instinct to click as soon as you hit the portal? Well, probably because it's the clearest visual indicator for the click. Over time, muscle memory will kick in and the click will likely become consistent. Naturally, this doesn't apply to all players. Some are more experienced and some may just comprehend it quicker than other players. There is another reason why this click may be inconsistent or hard to learn. That would be due to the actual frame window shifting based on previous inputs, which leads into our next topic. Setup-based gameplay. Setup-based gameplay occurs when inputs impact the orientation or size of the frame window for a future click. For the longest time, I considered setup-based gameplay to always be a bad thing. I now think that there is a time and place to incorporate it, as long as it is intentionally intuitive. There will be little bits of setup-based clicks in almost every level. There isn't much you can do about it, but you can try and minimize them. Take a look at these clicks. It is beneficial to jump as close to the spike as possible to make the yellow orb an easier input. This type of gameplay is intuitive. Whether the player knows just by looking at it or learns it over time, they will figure it out. Part of learning in Geometry Dash is aligning perceived windows with the corresponding actual window. As a player, you do what works, and if something works, you shift your perceived window towards it. I think most people start out creating setup-based gameplay unintentionally. I did the same. Over time, I tried to make my gameplay entirely devoid of setups. I now try to create a mix of individual clicks as well as sets of clicks that correspond with each other. How you mix these elements is entirely a personal choice, and gives whatever level you're making its own personality. Less is more. I find that the majority of the time, less is more. The earliest and latest input should be clear and concise. That often means getting rid of fluff. This is exactly what I explained in the first tutorial video I made. This unnecessary fluff is one of the key contributors to bloating the perceived window. Remember that it is a good idea to have the perceived window be smaller than the actual window. Now, I did say the majority of the time. I feel I should clarify further. There are scenarios where more is better. A game mode like Swing or Ship might benefit from more obstacles. A Straight Fly might be more interesting with more spikes. Intentionality in playtesting. Both intentionality and intuitiveness are factors of consistent gameplay. We should aim to be intentionally intuitive. This means having every click be learnable. As someone plays our levels, they should improve over time. Every time you place objects to create a new input, think about how someone will approach it. The greatest way to get a feel for this is to play it yourself. Playtesting is the best way to improve a level. In my opinion, the creator is the most important playtester. I see a lot of people asking what difficulty they should make their level when starting to create. I think it's best not to make anything harder than what you can reasonably get runs on. That way you don't have to completely rely on others to playtest your level. Even with Glass Chapel, which is the level I'm working on currently, I'm able to get small runs for each section. I recommend trying to get runs on the levels you are building. It deepens your understanding of what you want to accomplish with the level, as well as what you need to change. The subjective truth. I wish I had all the answers for making the best possible gameplay. Even while writing the script for this video, I had to go back and revise several sections because my opinions on those parts changed. It's likely that I will disagree with what I've said in the near future. I've tried to keep everything I've said as objective as possible, but objectivity is not very feasible in this type of video. There are several topics I have avoided because I find them to be up to personal taste. One of those topics that I feel I should mention now is the following question. What makes a click satisfying? I feel as though I would get many different answers if I were to ask several people. I've heard arguments made for delayed consequences being an unsatisfying thing, but I personally don't find delayed consequences to be annoying. Everything goes back to the expectations of the player. Every player is different. Every player believes different things. It's kind of shocking to see how deep-rooted some Geometry Dash opinions are. Our beliefs shape everything, including our emotions. And knowing this, it isn't surprising to see how some people act when playing Geometry Dash. At the end of the day, we can only control so much of the player's experience. The enjoyment of a level is in the player's hands. So to close, what should we strive for when making gameplay? Well, our number one priority should be making it fun. I used to think that fun gameplay is equivalent to consistent gameplay, but now I'm not so sure. I would say that there's a higher likelihood of gameplay being fun when everything is intentional, meaning every death feels like the player's fault. It's easy to blame a death on the creator of the game itself when it doesn't feel intended. Whose fault it actually is a subjective matter.